Welcome to the Classroom Café, where it's all about brewing the conversation between fellow educators. This special presentation is brought to you by the United Federation of Teachers and the union's Member Assistance Program. Thank you for joining us today. We hope this podcast inspires you, nourishes you, and motivates you. Now let's get started.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Classroom Cafe podcast. My name is Janice Acosta, Clinical Coordinator at the UFT Member Assistance Program. And we also have our wonderful host, Selma.
Hi everyone, I'm Selma Williams, Mental Health Manager here with the Member Assistance Program.
Today we are joined by Jamie Lapau as well as SP Brown to have a wonderful conversation about Kyrie School Blues. So Jamie, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Jamie Lapau. I'm a Senior Administrator in the Office of Safety and Youth Development under Counseling Support. And I provide all the professional learning for school counselors and school social workers citywide.
Great, thank you, Jamie. We're so glad that you can be here with us today. So for our listeners out there, you may remember last month we had SP Brown, author, who talked about her novel Gifts in Brown Paper Packages, and she talked a lot about the gifts lens. Well, she has another book that is out called Kyrie School Blues, and we're thrilled and excited to have a conversation about that book and how it can play a role in education for ourselves as educators as well as for our students. So welcome back, SP.
Thank you so much, Janice. So happy to be here again. This is fun.
Yeah. So for all of our listeners, can you give us a little bit of background about Kyrie School Blues?
Absolutely. So Kyrie School Blues is a 3rd to 5th grade chapter book, book 1 of a chapter book series that is called The Gift's Journey. And what Kyrie School Blues is about is the character Kyrie. Some of you adults who've read the novel might remember Kyrie was the main character. And essentially, this is the beginning of Kyrie's story as she enters school for the first time. Kyrie is an 8-year-old 4th grader entering school. She enters at age 7, but the book really takes place as she's 8 years old, and she's in 4th grade because she's homeschooled. And when she gets to school for the first time, she is skipped, at a time where, she's entering really bushy-tailed and eager to make friends because she's been isolated, having been homeschooled. And she enters school to a myriad of challenges that she didn't realize she was going to have. The main one being she doesn't make friends as quickly as she hopes, and she deals with bullying. So that is the crux of the storyline, and the fact that she loves words and she loves reading. And she enters school carrying Kyrie's fantastic words list, which she carries everywhere she goes. And she utilizes it to write down words that she hears adults use or she finds in her writing that are fantastic words or fancy words that make her feel good when she uses them in her conversations and her thoughts later. So that's the gist of Kyrie School Blues.
Thank you, SP, for that background on Kyrie and what this new book is all about. So you said it's geared for 3rd to 5th grades?
Yes, 3rd to 5th graders. It was edited by a children's book editor who put it directly on grade level for 4th grade. So it's right in the middle of that target age group, target grade group level. And it's an interesting, read in that it gives readers the opportunity to read at the level that they are, but challenge them a little bit through this whole practice of curating and collecting words that she does. And, this book is about a character who begins to develop some resilience, right? She learns the this concept of the gift in the brown paper package. Well, what is that? Well, that is the premise that hard stuff happens in life, right? We have challenges, we have adversity, but if we dig down a little bit, what we find is that there's a strength, right? There's a value to be found in every hard situation. And that's what the bullying arrives for her, or that's what it provides for her, I should say. An opportunity to figure out what's the value in this horrible situation that she's dealing with. So it's an evolution to finding her voice and building some resilience.
As educators in New York City public schools, right? Trauma, challenges, bullying, right? These are things that we hear and talk about every day. So how can we, or how does Kyrie School Blues lean into those topics and create space for those conversations?
I, that's a good question. It's interesting that we're still dealing with bullying, right? I mean, I wrote this narrative really again from experiences from my life. I'm the ripe old age of 50, and I'm still talking about bullying, which I dealt with as a child at age 8, right? We know that what happens with adults is that bullying not addressed and not dealt with, right, from a self-awareness perspective, becomes bullying in workplaces and in our family lives, right? And we see that play out all the time, right? We see it play out in workplaces, we see it play out in politics. So, I think for educators, and I'd love to hear Jamie's view on this as well, given the work that she does. She's clearly ensconced in behavioral issues, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but I think that bullying dealt with from a children's perspective. I think it's a powerful conversation to have, particularly through the literature, for children to begin seeing this. And I'm sure they see it in other literature, but seeing it in a storyline that will resonate, that the experiences will resonate, I think is a very powerful tool, and keeping that dialogue going about identifying the behavior and really not standing for it.
Yeah, there's a gazillion reasons why children bully. A big reason is because they have a really an intense need to feel in control of someone else or the situation. Sometimes it's the need to just want to be heard, but it's really exhibiting some power over another person, and typically because they feel powerless. So they're projecting what they are feeling or wanting or needing, and that's really what they're projecting. So it's hard. It's one of those situations that society has never been able to solve. We kind of just manage it as best as we can. But I really do love the story of the character, and I'm interested in hearing more about how it plays out.
Well, yeah, so that's interesting, right? Because, you mentioned, Jamie, that, bullies bully because of a need to exhibit power. And, I think that's such it's such a dynamic that continues throughout life, right? When we look at, various situations and in our adulthood, much is about power, right? And who feels powerful and who doesn't. So there's certainly a pathology to that. And, frankly, I didn't realize this as a child when I was dealing with bullying issues. But being able to sort of reflect back, I recognize, I was bullied at home. And I was bullied at home by, of my father, who had his own challenges. and a need to exhibit power in his home, frankly, because he didn't have it outside of the home, right? And I recognized the bullying very quickly as a child, as Kyrie does, but didn't understand it coming from the child's perspective, because my thought, coming out of the home, was children are just supposed to have fun, right? Like, we're just supposed to be in this space, to like be friends. And that was the sort of the naive place. So that recognition of sort of the hurt that's there and the need to feel power, I think is important to explore. But I think you have to start off with, how do we just deal with, in a school setting, how do we deal with bullies? And in this story, Kyrie learns to use her words, and that's how she deals with it, right? The very thing that comforted her, the very thing that made her feel smart, right? Collecting these fancy words, she ultimately stands up to the bully by all of those words that were in her head. And she was challenged throughout the book with, I don't know if I can do this. I don't feel brave. I don't know that I don't know that I can find the right words to make this go away. So I think that's a powerful message for children to hear. For me, I just had to stand up for myself. And most of the time the bullying stopped. It got rediverted, but I stopped being the problem in this situation. But feeling powerless and silenced is very, very common, I think, for young people. And it won't stop every situation, right? It won't curb every bully, but it's a start.
Yeah, one of the skills all children need to learn early is having courage. Courage is really the cornerstone of life. It's taking risks, it's trying things you haven't tried, in face of the fear, just general fear, because you don't know what the outcome is, or uncertainty, but doing it anyhow, because you don't know if it's going to make the situation worse or if it's going to make it better. You really don't know until you try and see what outcome you get. So that, I mean, courage is huge, and we've got to teach our children to have that courage and risk making a situation either better or worse.
Yeah.
It's interesting. In Kyrie School Blues, there's a character, her friend, who is a little bit chubby, right? She's a little overweight, and she's so confident, and she gets called names too, but she's very quick with the words to tell the kids to back off, and I'm getting hundreds on all the tests, so you can't even spell the words that you're throwing at me. And that becomes she becomes a true friend to Kyrie, and Kyrie's able to see courage exemplified in this girl that's her age, and really just not afraid to stand up. And that's one of the things that helps her, as well as a teacher that encourages her that she has a skill that she didn't really think that she had, or didn't feel that anyone wanted to hear. And she, and I don't want to give the whole storyline away, but essentially she built some confidence through the encouragement of a teacher. And I think that's a wonderful message for teachers to understand that oftentimes you may not know the situation, right, that your students are coming into the classroom with. And your ability as an educator to always be that buffer, right, that positive buffer that sees greatness in them even when they don't see it in themselves, essentially could be the difference between this child succeeding and not. Knowing that this child, even though they may not show up performing all the time, this child is really someone that can be great. And that's really also sort of the subtle messaging in the storyline. It's a message to teachers about taking that charge and always being that sort of positive force, that buffer to help mitigate the trauma that that child might be going through outside of the school environment.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point about being that positive force. And I think also the power of humanity, right? When there's an opportunity for a teacher or a trusted adult to also stand up to for what they believe in front of students. I think that's something that's often missed as well as opportunities to teach, right? Because there are oftentimes, in buildings you've had to teachers and faculty had to have to stand up to each other, right? Even or to other
Mhm.
students who might be dominating the classroom in a way, modeling ways that you can be kind but firm, right, and get your point across. And I think that is the key. Seeing um, children and adults alike owning, feeling in that place of I guess in the powerless position and almost finding ways, creative ways to level that playing field, right? Like
Mhm.
Yeah,
in
Selma, that's a great point. It's really empathy. The
Yeah.
teachers,
Mhm,
the staff, they have to demonstrate empathy and model, just as USP just said, that the friend of the main character in your book demonstrated and modeled the courage for her and how to stand up for herself and how to let things roll off her back and not internalize the bullying. But in schools, it's hard, it's hard. But staff, it doesn't matter what your role is, everybody has to model empathy because that's how kids are going to learn. And it's really out of frustration. You hear a lot, just don't do that, just don't say that. Well, that's not really helping.
No.
It's like a very tiny band-aid on a amputation. It's not really helping.
Oh,
You have to
Yeah.
go a little bit deeper
yeah.
and
Yeah.
explain why it's not okay to say that and why it's not okay to do that.
mhm.
You shouldn't do that because it is hurtful. You shouldn't do that because it's embarrassing to somebody else. How would you feel if you were embarrassed in front of the class? How would you feel if somebody spoke to you that way? It's
Right.
connecting the feeling to the behavior. That is how you develop empathy in children
Yeah.
and in adults too. And listen, teachers are the unsung heroes. This is an impossible job they're being asked to do, and
Yeah.
no one's ever going to be perfect at it. But
That's
at
right.
least be mindful of what you're saying and how you're saying it. And even
Oh,
if in the moment you
Mhm.
don't deliver the message the way you wanted to, you can always come back to it.
yeah.
Mhm.
That's essentially very much so my platform for educating through the gifts lens. The concept of how you find your strength in strife, which is the what underpins the messaging in my novel. It's about GIFTS, and I shared a little bit of this in the last part of this series, but you know the G is for grace, the I is for intention, the F is for forgiveness, the T is for trauma, right? But we don't want to focus on the trauma and sit in it. We want to be aware of it,
Mhm.
but we want to focus on the truth, right? What's the truth
Mhm.
of the story? And then story. What's your story, right? I think that's an important framework. It's not necessarily unique, but it keeps top of mind and gives educators the framework to put every single experience that they're going through in their classrooms through, because it's not only about how you're interacting with your students, it's about what you're bringing to the table as well, right? What are you bringing to this academic environment, right? Your trauma as an educator, because we all have it, right? Your trauma is
Mhm.
relevant here, right? So when you talk about grace and which is very related to the F, which is forgiveness, uh, what does grace look like? How do we educate from a platform of grace, right? So I go through some sort of practical applications of that within my series. But this is something that has to be employed every single day, right? With every single experience. And it's a work in progress. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm in this journey all the time. Like you guys heard me say earlier today when we were talking, I started to say something and I said, oh, let me dial that back. I'm going to be intentional about my language. I'm going to say it this way,
Mhm.
right? It's not that easy, right? You have to keep it top of mind. You have to change your lens, right? And that's what finding your strength and strife is, right? It's changing the lens by which you look and deal with experiences on a day-to-day basis.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
even, in the work that we do at MAP, the groups and support groups and things like that, our well-being workshops, right? And even just in our individual sessions when we meet with members, we're constantly, reminding them like, hold some space, hold some forgiveness for yourself, right?
Mm,
Hold some empathy for yourself, because what we're talking about is really changing a way of approaching, thinking, behaving, doing, being, which is really hard because we're changing and we're adjusting a way that we've been living for our entire lives, right?
yeah.
And
Mhm.
and it's hard work.
It's hard work. And it's also, the other part of this is recognizing the importance of the individual story, right?
Mhm,
Recognizing the individual of the S in gifts, which is what is your story? We could spend a couple of hours, right, talking about the power of the story and recognizing when you get to know yourself, right, and when you get to know the people, i.e., the students that you're interacting with, and you understand their stories, that empathy that Jamie just talked about, it just rolls off a little bit easier, right?
Mhm.
mhm,
Story
Yeah.
is so important. So, part of my author workshops that I do, around the literature is really, spending some time on what is your strength, no, what is your challenge, what is the strength that comes out of that challenge. Now, what is your story, right? Let's talk story, right? Which is an old Hawaiian folklore that really brings you back to a situation where you give students the opportunity to just talk story. They're not actually sitting in a classroom writing to a test, right? This
mhm,
gives them the freedom to focus on story, which maybe it's their story, maybe it's another story, but it's just really about getting into telling stories and owning stories, which is, I think, so important in the development of self and self-awareness, which is, I think, at the core of the social and emotional themes that are so dear right now.
mhm,
Yeah, but also telling the story, but ending the story with the strength and the value and the learning and the
mhm,
growth that came with it. Because we don't want kids to sit in the victim mindset or mentality.
Right,
It's
right,
there has to be a next step to it. So
right.
yeah, the story might not be so pretty, but what did you learn from it? How did you grow from it?
Mhm.
mhm,
That's got to be the next like chapter of the story.
mhm.
It
Yeah.
can't just end with the trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why that's why I put truth in front of story, right? Because I think that if you're cognizant of the whatever the challenge or the strife is, right?
Mhm.
Or the trauma that came out of it, we have to be aware of it, right? We want people to own it, but we don't want to sit in it, right? That's what
Yeah.
that's what
Right.
we're talking about, right? So I think that once we get through that journey, we can get to the story, right? I think the identity of the strength and the value comes first,
Mhm,
at
mhm,
least at least in my mind, and that was my process, right? So when I talk, I'm speaking from a very personal place. I just turned 50 last year, and I spent the vast majority of my life, almost like towards the end of my 30s, not owning my story. So this has been, a real journey for me, in that, I never wanted my trauma to define me. I interacted in circles where that were frankly fairly elitist. Attorneys are some of the most elitist groups of people that you can ever interact with, and, um, myself not included. And frankly, the circles that I interacted with most often, I didn't want to feel judged, right? There's so much guilt and shame that gets shrouded
Yeah.
around
Yeah.
around around trauma, right? And
Mhm.
I talk about this a lot in the context of the work that I do. I'm president of the board of a domestic violence agency on Long Island, servicing victims of domestic violence and rape, sexual assault, child abuse, and such. And it's called the Safe Center of Long Island. I want to plug them. It's very, very amazing, amazing not-for-profit agency, servicing folks in need. But one of the things that we talk about a lot is this is the reason that trauma is such an issue that gets, swept under the rug, right? It's not the sexy cause to support. It's because all of the guilt and the shame that's
Mhm.
associated with
Yeah.
it.
Mhm.
And I want to get out in front of it and say, yes, I'm a child of trauma. Let's talk about it, right? Because when you get rid of that guilt and shame, it gives you the ability to, one, for folks to feel empathy for you, and two, for you to impart that release for other people, right? That ability to be vulnerable. And children need that, right? They're coming into schools. We know that in the ACEs data that 2/3 of the population has been subjected to at least two ACEs, right? That is the vast majority, right? Look to your
Mhm.
left, look to your right. Both of those people in any setting that you're in likely has some ACEs, right? So if we know that, we recognize that many of the children that are sitting in our classrooms, regardless of what backgrounds they're coming from, what socioeconomic backgrounds or racial ethnic backgrounds they're coming from, they're likely coming from some ACEs. We've got to get to a point where we feel comfortable dialoguing, right? So that children own the story and they can get beyond it.
Yeah.
And I could stay on a soapbox about that for a really long time. The guilt is hard.
Yeah. No, but it's really everything that you said is really powerful. And it is the guilt and the shame that society puts around trauma in these situations of the survivors is
Hmm.
really hard to overcome. And I think that's where Kyrie School Blues can really be, um, Kyrie School Blues and Gifts and Brown Paper Packages, right? I think both of them really provide a space for conversation to happen around trauma and to find ways to allow people to own their story and find that gift inside the brown paper package.
Yeah, the ugly package wrapped in string. No,
Yeah.
no, no, definitely. And it appears in this book one as some bullying that's not pretty, but it's not the worst thing. There's certainly much worse. But what we don't want to do, we don't want to play bad stuff Olympics, right?
Mhm.
Kyrie's trauma around the way the children treated her in a space that she thought was going to be fun and full of friendship, uh,
Mhm.
that was hard, right?
Mhm.
Children can relate to that regardless of what the trauma is, I think, that they're going through. And that's the point here, right? Looking for how to pull out the strength. Well, we have to sit and look at the situation and figure out how can we find value.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting, to hear the way children react to it. I did a read along for World Read Out Loud Day, which is today. Who knew? I didn't. And for Jericho School District in Long Island, and it was for sixth graders, I mean middle schoolers, which I was like, oh, this is a little, this book is a little below the sixth grade, I mean the middle school level, and I
Mhm.
was so overwhelmed by the questions that they were full of questions. They had a ton of questions before I did the read. They had a ton of questions after I did the read. And they were really excited to hear, they only got a little bit of the book. So they were really excited to, figure out what else was going to happen with Kyrie and how she was going to get out of her situation. So this is a topic that resonates regardless of age.
Just with students, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
No, I mean, I'm wondering what Jamie is, are you seeing in your work that you're doing sort of an uptick in those types of behavioral issues in terms of, interpersonal issues between others, peer-to-peer interpersonal issues?
I think, the pandemic triggered quite a bit. So it's hard to really say what's normal at this point because every
Mhm.
normal has changed. Like the whole
Yeah.
baseline has changed. I don't think it stopped. I think
Mm,
it's just showing up in different forms. There's a lot more. I don't know. I can't really say that there's more or less bullying. It's just always there.
yeah.
It's always, and I think it's the pain. Kids are in pain, and the
Yeah.
pain is
Mm,
always there, and it just shows up in a myriad of
mm,
ways. And then we have staff who also are in pain for various
yeah.
reasons, and they just don't know how to deal with it and address it appropriately.
Yeah.
Mm,
Because when we have staff that have limited social emotional skills,
yeah.
they're not going to address children appropriately.
Right.
They just can't.
mhm.
So I don't know that there's more bullying now than that there was before the pandemic. I think there's a lot of behavioral issues in
Mm-hmm.
general that have resulted. That, they've always been there, but with the pandemic, it just magnified it.
Gotcha.
So
Gotcha.
kids would, if they're experiencing anxiety, depression, pain, sadness, hurt, feelings of powerlessness, helplessness, it's showing up in aggression
Mm,
rather than
Mm-hmm.
being, depressed,
Okay.
like, and just kind of introverted. It's just showing up in aggression
Mm-hmm.
at
mm,
whomever's in front of them.
mm,
That's, I think, fair to say that we're seeing
Yeah.
more of.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think getting, incentivizing and providing forums for children to talk, is, we talked about this in the last, in the first part of this series. But mental health services are not accessible to everyone. There are many communities that don't believe in therapy and
mhm,
certainly don't believe in therapy for their children. And you know uh, that's a it's a disservice, right? It's a disservice to the children. But how do we sort of mitigate and deal with that in the school setting? I think we have to give opportunities and incentivize children to dialogue.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
We
yeah.
have a huge movement of restorative practices in the school system.
Mhm.
And the foundation of that is building community by storytelling.
Oh, wonderful. Oh,
So it's a huge movement. I wish there was more of it. I wish there was more buy-in from some schools,
mhm,
but the schools that do it with integrity,
Mhm.
they see the results,
mhm.
they really do. And it's building community because when you have trust, you have permission to be vulnerable without
mm,
Mhm.
fear of shame
yeah.
or
Mhm.
judgment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that, there's a lot of things that can be done, simple, easy, quick things just to build community and build trust. Because when kids know each other well, they're
Mhm.
less likely to bully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. And introducing, right, different mediums to start that conversation, such as, right, books, such as Kyrie School Blues, right,
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
really start that movement and start that motion into that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important, to your point, Janice, that students, continuously see characters in literature that they read in school that that represent who they are from a
Mhm.
cultural perspective, from a racial perspective. When I was in school, I wasn't reading any books with any children that looked like me. I think it's important that diverse communities,
Mhm.
see all different types of children, right? So it's important that, a book that has an African American little girl on the front cover
Mhm.
is not only seen or used in schools that are predominantly Black and Brown, but that
Yeah.
it's also in schools with children who are, Caucasian, that are Asian, that are, Middle Eastern, from, all different,
Absolutely.
right? Um, and that sort of also ties into, social and emotional wellness themes, right? Because
Absolutely.
that self-awareness piece, right, under the DESA, competencies, that matters, right?
Mhm.
Um, what my next book, which is slated to come out at the end of this year, will pull in, multicultural characters, right? Children from other communities, and pull in, treating people differently from a neurodivergent standpoint, which is a whole
Mhm.
nother,
Mhm.
sort of avenue of
Yeah,
and trigger for, children, being treated differently by
absolutely.
their peers, and sometimes by teachers, right?
Yeah.
So, um, I think that that's a very important aspect of this whole community mission that Jamie has talked about. And I'm on board. I'm
Well,
definitely on board.
SP, we can't wait for your next book to come out at the end of this year. We will be patiently awaiting while wiggling in our seats for its release.
Well, that's okay because we have a whole lot of exploration to do with Kyrie School Blues. So
We do in the meantime. Yes, we do. Well, thank you so much, SP, for joining us once again. And Jamie, thank you as well for being here, for taking the time to be in this space with us. We appreciate all that you contributed to this conversation. So thank you.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me. I loved it.
All right, everyone. So if you're looking for SP's books, either of them, Gifts in Brown Paper Packages or Kyrie School Blues, SP, where can they find them?
So you can, thank you. That's a wonderful question. So you can find Kyrie School Blues on my website, which is SP Brown Writes. That's SPBROWN Writes. Or WRITES, I can't spell.com, as well as on Amazon, but the only place you can get a signed copy, an author signed copy, is via my website. Also mention that follow me on Instagram at s.p.brownwrites to make sure you keep up with all the great things that is happening in the world of Kyrie. And check out Gifts in Brown Paper Packages on audio. That's also available now, recently released, and available on my website as well on many platforms, including Google Play and Barnes & Noble, and coming soon in Audible.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yes.
It was a pleasure. Bye.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you for joining us for this episode of the Classroom Café. If you are a UFT member, the Members Assistance Program can be reached at 212-701-9620 or at mapinfo@uft.org.